All right, so welcome to the Two Rivers Wildfire Coalition Learning Network. We've got Kamie Long with the Colorado State Forest Service here with us to talk about managing pinyon and juniper forests, as well as some good information about the Ips beetle. So Kamie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Alice. I'm glad we get to talk about these topics tonight. That's important to Western Slope over here. My name is Kamie Long. I'm with the Colorado State Forest Service here in Grand Junction, and I'm going to talk about two important topics. One is the Piñon Ips bark beetle, and the second is wildfire mitigation, defensible space stuff that you can do to protect your home and your property. So first, we're going to go into Piñon Ips bark beetle. It's an insect that impacts us here in the West Slope. However, they are native, so they're not these big uh, things coming from other countries. They are native to U.S. They're native to Colorado. They're native to their West Slope. So even though they do kill our trees, they're part of Mother Nature's force of keeping our forest healthy. So they are a native bark beetle. These are the guys that do the killing of our pinyon trees. They're very host specific. They're only going to attack pinyon trees up in Glade Park areas, especially. They will not attack juniper trees. Um, and what's interesting about these Ips beetles and the way that entomologists, the insect folks, um, identify these bugs is by that spine that's on the back of their butts. They have this very distinct spiny butt. So that's how you can tell a Piñon Ips beetle from maybe a mountain pine beetle is their spiny backsides. So they're really small though. That's my finger in that photo. You can see that they are about the size of a grain of rice. It's just mass numbers that attack the trees. And so, what will they attack? Like I said, they're only going to attack pinyon pines, especially in our native our native areas, wood, wildland, urban interface areas. They're going to be looking for pinyon trees. They're only attacking green material, and by green material, I mean live, or has moisture in it. So you can see in that photo, this was up in Carbondale, Cedar, or Glenwood Springs area, and this is a building site. So they have just bulldozed and chopped trees down and pushed everything to the edges. And these trees were green when they were cut and then stacked. Well, the beetles actually quite appreciate you cutting down green material and stacking it because there's no defense system left in these splash piles. There's no the tree isn't trying to protect itself anymore because it's to us it's dead. To the beetles, it still can be a home where they can lay their eggs and their brood can hatch. So they will attack anything that has moisture in it. Once it's dried, like firewood, dry firewood, they won't attack anything that's dead that has no moisture in it. Um, and they can attack anything over 1 inch in diameter. So even branches can be a host home for them. So, what are some signs and symptoms that your tree has been attacked? This is a big question we get. And so, these photos can help you when you're walking around your property what to look for. The ones on the left, the pitch tubes, these can be as smaller than your pinky nail or as big as your thumbnail. It really depends on the health of the tree. The pitch tubes are created by the tree and using sap and water. So if the trees are really stressed from drought or lack of water, if they're in a landscape, they're not going to have as much moisture available to produce sap. So that's when we can get really small pitch tubes. And lately, with the drought we've been experiencing, pitch tubes haven't been a really good indicator. That top one you can see is really small. And I've seen them where they're almost non existent. So, pitch tubes in times of wet years can be a really good indicator, but these days they cannot be your only indicator. Another a good indicator, regardless of the season and moisture levels, is sawdust, and that's what the picture on the right is in that circle. That's really fine sawdust, and these insects they bore into the tree and they're tooling around in the xylem and phloem. So think about the bark being their roof and the wood being their floor. And they're in the middle in this really tiny, tiny layer where the tree moves water and nutrients up and down the tree. So when they're in that layer, the cambium layer, they are um, making tunnels underneath the tree's bark. And when they do that, they're creating sawdust. Well, Ips beetles, it turns out, like to keep their tunnels clean. They don't like them packed full of sawdust. And so they push the sawdust back out the entrance hole. And I've actually seen them do this. They kind of back up like a dump truck and shove out the sawdust from the hole and then go back in and get some more sawdust. It's almost entertaining if you didn't know what they were really doing, killing the tree. But when they kick the sawdust out of the bark, it will fall down into the bark scales or accumulate at the base of the tree. And this sawdust, until Mother Nature and weather blows it away, if you see this really fine reddish color sawdust in the trunks, crevices, and at the base, that's a really good indicator. And it's fine. Some of the other insects that you'll see out there in the trees create kind of a coarser sawdust. Um, it's just not fine. It's coarse. So look for the fine sawdust that's reddish in color because it's red because it's coming from the bark versus a white color because it's coming from the wood. So exit holes. So when the beetle enters the tree, if it's standing, is alive. And so it's pushing out the sap, trying to drown the beetle. And so that's how you can usually tell if it's an entrance hole because there's some kind of sap, even if it's really minuscule, attached to that entrance hole. When they leave the tree, the next generation, when they leave the tree, they are leaving more or less a dead tree. And so their exit holes don't have any sap associated with them. But I like to point out that there's different kind of holes. There's lots of insects in that tree. It's not just Ips, especially after the tree has succumbed to the Ips beetle attack. So the image on the left is bark from a piñon tree, but you can see that those holes are kind of large compared to my finger. Those are my fingers, so they're same sizes on each picture. So the one on the left, they're kind of large, they're not perfectly round. That's something else. There's other, like I said, decomposer insects in that tree that it's attracted to stressed trees once the Ips beetles have pushed the tree over the edge and it's dying, that it attracts other insects. So the image on the right are exit holes from the Ips beetle. They're perfectly round. They're maybe the size of a BB pellet or a pencil, tip of a pencil, but they're perfectly round and very tiny. You have to get right up to the tree to see them. But once you start seeing those exit holes, again with no sap attached to it, then that's the indicator that the tree is empty of Ips beetle. They've left the tree. It's not infested with Ips beetle anymore. I have a slide that you'll see. Elvis has left the building, not in there anymore. So exit holes. So we talked about entrance holes, which have sap because the tree is alive. Um, the sap amount varies on the tree's ability to produce sap because of the amount of moisture it has. And exit holes will not have any sap because the tree is essentially dead at that point. So when should you when are beetles active? And so we talk about in the next section, um, wildfire mitigation actions. Well, if you live in Piñon country, which I think a lot of you do, or else you wouldn't be listening to this, we tell you, oh, wildfire is a big deal in Piñon juniper country, which is very true. However, because of our Ips bark beetle, you can only do minimal work cutting green piñon trees in the summertime. Because if you cut green piñon trees in the summertime, you will attract beetles to your property. The beetles are active a significant portion of the year. They emerge in the spring when the daytime temperatures are above 50 degrees for 2 weeks. So if it hits 50 and then drops back low, that's not enough. It needs to be a consistent 50 degrees for a couple weeks. When that happens, that's their indicator that spring has come and they can come out and they're not going to get frozen in a tree. It's unlikely they'll get frozen in a tree because of weather. Conversely, in the fall, the beetles follow that same kind of pattern, that the daytime temperatures are below 50 degrees for a couple weeks. That's their indicator to go hibernate in a tree. So you don't want to cut, you don't want to be pruning, you don't want to be cutting any green trees, green branches within a month or so, at least a couple weeks before it's going to warm up to that 50 degrees, because you don't want it to be the time has come when it's warm and you to have green branches on the ground. So it's best to stop any green tree cutting a couple weeks before that warming occurs, so you don't have green material on the ground. So in the
Kamie,
fall, do we have a question?
I was gonna say I have just a couple of questions.
Yes, please.
So with the green trees, what if it's like kind of green or like a greenish brown?
So if it depends. That's my favorite answer with forestry. It depends. So if you're like couple weeks, it's like February, and you're cutting a few branches that are mostly dead.
Mhm,
That probably is okay. And if it's just a couple branches, put them in a real big, a bright, sunny area, let them dry out.
mhm,
If it's summertime and you have a couple green branches, you're probably okay to cut a couple. It's the smell of fresh sap that draws them in. So
mhm,
you don't want to put this, I kind of just imagine this big pheromone cloud over your property. If you just cut a couple branch here or there and you take them off property as soon as possible, you're probably okay.
mhm.
It's significant, like this, significant amounts of green material that's putting this pheromone sap cloud, smelling cloud into your atmosphere that's going to draw them in.
Got it. Cool. Thank you. So yeah, like I asked the question because in the picture there's a lot of brown, but there's some green poking through,
Yeah.
and
And
like
this,
that can still be a problem.
yeah. And this picture was taken in the summertime. Um, and they had been sitting there for a while.
Okay,
So they
so
were
they were
browning
green.
because they were slowly drying out. But the larger pieces of material in there are really good habitat for the Ips bark beetle to well, they're not really attacking a dead tree, but to enter and mate and produce eggs and larvae for the next generation. Because these guys, from attacking a tree to the next generation is only like 6 weeks.
Mhm,
So they're producing new generations every 6 weeks all summer long. Most bark beetles, like the mountain pine beetle, the one that is attacks ponderosa and lodgepole and is a big deal in Summit and Grand counties, they have one generation per year. The mom and dad find each other, they lay their eggs, that generation doesn't come out until next year. We're not that lucky. Our generations will come out every 6 weeks as long as daytime temperatures are over 50 degrees. So that's why it's so important to not attract them to your property, because once they're there, they're they're going to be procreating and um, attacking your trees all summer long.
thank you. I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were going on to fall.
I'm glad. That was good. So this is the second part of timing, where where it talks about where they hibernate. Um, and I had mentioned that before, that they hibernate in their tree. They find a hibernating tree once temperatures go below 50 degrees for a couple of weeks. So again, if you just drop below 50 and then come back up and warm back up, um, it's not enough. But if you stay under for a couple of weeks and then have a warm day, that's okay. They're not going to come back out. You really want a good couple solid weeks of below 50 daytime temperatures, which we're in. Um, they are hibernating for sure right now. So right now is a great time to be doing any green tree cutting. I like this picture because it really shows where tree roots are located. We think in our head that they're this, well, at least in Western Colorado, that we think that tree roots have these long, big tap roots, and that's not where our tree roots are located here in Western Colorado. That's not where the oxygen is in our soil, and it's not where the moisture is in our soil. They're really in that top 12 to 18 inches, and you can really see that in this photo, that the roots are pretty close to the surface. And so when you're watering or doing any construction or activity on your property, you can damage the tree roots really easily, which stresses the tree, which can attract the beetle. A stressed tree attracts beetles. So fuel reduction work time of year. Um, avoid cutting in the summertime. If you must, you really want to remove all green tree parts within 2 or 3 days. Anything longer than that, there's a high chance that that material will either bring them to the property or they'll attack the material. November to February are the best months to do green tree cutting because the beetle flights are over for the year, and your material will dry before they resume in spring. So if you start getting into March and April, cutting green material, unless you're really thoughtful about where you're placing it in bright sunny areas and not in deep stacks, then it won't dry out in time. I think this one's funny. Stop chewing with your mouth open. So dead trees. Once they're dead, the trees are dead, the beetles are not there. There's other things that are in there. There's, the decomposition is done by fungus and insects and bacteria. And so there's stuff going on in that tree after the Ips beetles have left. And people think that they find these really big, nasty, big larvas, thinking that that's the Ips beetle, and they're just decomposers. They're doing the good stuff, breaking the wood down. So dead trees don't have Ips bark beetle in them. How you deal with dead trees is you can chip them, you can burn your trees. I have asterisks next to that because you need to make sure you're checking in with your local fire department to see what their rules and restrictions are with burning, and make sure that they are aware that you're going to be pile burning. You don't want to do something stupid and start a fire. So check in with your fire department. You can remove dead trees from the site. You like to the landfill. Our landfill in Mesa County has a really great recycling center that you can take the material to for free for homeowners. You can lop and scatter the smaller branches, which is just literally chopping the branches and the wood into smaller pieces and scattering it and making sure it's not taller than about 18 inches in depth. That's lop and scatter. And you can use it for firewood because, again, there's no Ips bark beetle in dead trees. So that's the option for how to manage dead trees. Now remember, you can't save every tree. And so a lot of folks up on Glade Park especially have larger acreage. So you can't save all the trees on your 40 acres. So you really need to determine your landscape trees, which trees you're gonna give special care. And so you got to draw a line in the sand. These are the trees that you'll provide supplemental water in the wintertime if there's not the ground's not frozen. In the summertime, if we haven't received any significant moisture, you can preventatively spray these trees, and you can do some fuel mitigation in this area because the more trees you remove, the less competition there is between the trees that you've left on site. So I really like to remind people that you can't protect every tree. So draw your line in the sand, figure out which ones you can protect, and focus on those. Ooh, not what I expected. So preventative spray. Oh, I have two different screens going on. So preventative spraying. Some people don't want to use chemicals on their property. No problem. Watering, mitigating by reducing the amount of trees on the property are both really good options. But when you have a really heavy population or a high population of Ips beetle, sometimes some chemicals can help. It can be expensive because you do have to do it twice a year. And this is because those beetles are flying for so long. There are two main chemicals that we recommend, carbaryl and permethrin. Um, Permethrin's the is the chemical that they put in clothing to help protect you against um, mosquitoes. So, it's not a very high risk chemical pesticide. But again, you have to decide what's best for you and your property. But I like to let people know what their options are with preventative spraying. So again, you do have to spray twice a year, um, once in spring and once in the fall. The purpose for spraying in the spring is that those beetles that are coming out of hibernation, you don't want them to choose your trees. And then in the fall, when they're going into hibernation, you don't want them to choose your tree to hibernate in. I like to remember it by the 2A months, April and August. Well, you don't need to do them in that exact month. It can help trigger you to go, okay, I need to set this up with my contract with my arborist who can spray my trees, or I need to go purchase the chemicals, because you can use a backpack sprayer. You just need to try to get all the tree parts greater than 1 inch in diameter. Um, and at the minimum, you want to try to spray the larger branches and the trunk, because if you think about the numbers of insects that it can attack a 1 inch branch versus a 12-inch tree, there's a lot more insects that can attack a 12-inch tree number wise. So you want to spray the stuff where more insects could attack. So um, if you're doing it yourself and you just can't reach with your sprayer the smallest branches at the top of the tree, that's okay. Get the largest branches and the trunk, and that's better than nothing. There are companies in town that can spray. I know that Mark and Christina have reached out to them, and I'm not sure where we're at with that, so they can share that information. Um, but um, that's some information on spraying. Make sure you read the label, um, and
Sure. I can
wear
interject
protective gear.
there a little bit on the spraying. We had
Yeah,
a company called T4 Tree Services come up and they did three different locations.
great.
So I don't know the results. I'll follow up with that and share that with the group. I don't know how you know if you did any good when you're spraying.
Right,
But I can certainly reach out to the residents and follow up with everybody.
great. And that's T is in Teddy. The owner's name is Teddy Hildebrandt,
Yep.
and T4. They're a well known and respected company in Grand Junction in the Valley. So I'm glad to
Yep.
hear they were able to come up and connect with you guys, Mark.
Yep. Good people.
So the next thing that people here talk about are pheromone packets. These can work really good for insects that they're designed for. This website here, Forestry Distributing, if you go look at verbenone repellent, it says Ips Beetle. It absolutely does not work for Piñon Ips. They are taking your money and you're not going to get anything out of it. So what pheromone packets are is that beetles communicate with each other with chemicals like cologne and perfume, and very specific pheromones tell the beetles specific things. So they have a pheromone that says, hey guys, this tree is, I was successful in attacking this tree. Come attack it, and then we can kill it, and our babies will survive. They have another pheromone that says, this tree is full. We have already attacked it to full capacity. If you try to attack this tree, your babies won't survive because there's not enough room. It's fascinating. So the scientists have been able to reproduce, we call it the vacancy pheromone and the no vacancy pheromone. Scientists have been able to produce both of these pheromones, and for Douglas fir bark beetles and mountain pine bark beetles, they have been able to reproduce and be successful with the no vacancy pheromone in these packets. You hang them on the trees, and the beetles think that they're already full of beetles and they move on. However, we have not had anyone produce the the no vacancy pheromone for the Ips bark beetle, um, and don't believe um, this information on the internet. So just to give you a synopsis of what we talked about, this is my last slide on bark beetles, so I'll take any questions on this topic after this slide. But you want to pay attention to the time of year when you need to cut down green trees. You don't want to be cutting a significant number of green trees or branches in the summertime. You want to do that in the winter. You can remove dead trees any time of the year. The beetles are not interested in dead trees. You can use a preventative spray for your high value trees. Again, you do have to spray 2 times a year. Consider thinning your property, which will tie into our defensible space and wildfire mitigations practices in the next section. But when you're all competing for this for a small amount of water and a small amount of nutrients in the soil, if you remove some of those trees that aren't doing as well, and you make more available for the trees that you have that are remaining on site, they're going to do better. And then provide supplemental water, especially in the dry periods before our monsoon season start and our spring moisture, or in the wintertime. They do say especially conifers, do best if you can water them once a month during the wintertime, as long as the ground isn't frozen. And you just want to, what I do with my trees is I have one of those twin head sprinklers, and I just move them around to the 4 corners, the 4 cardinal directions around my tree for about 10 minutes. Where, I showed you that picture of where the roots are. They're only, 12 to 18 inches deep. So you're not trying to water, 15 feet down. It's just a foot. And so once the water starts pooling, you can move it to the next corner of your tree. So any questions for bark beetles, for Ips bark beetles?
Kamie, this is Mark. I've got a question regarding planting new trees or starting saplings to help kind of replace the trees that people have lost. And there may be a restoration component in the near future for that. But if we're putting the same tree back in, I mean, it's still going to be at the same risk as the trees that are already there, right?
Correct. It will take a while for them to be a size that they are interested in, because they won't attack anything smaller than 1 inch in diameter. So nothing, as we all know, grows very quickly around here. So it will take a while. So you're really just, and then by providing it water and a good planting site and taking care of it, you're reducing the stress on that tree. And so then it has a better chance of surviving and not even being interesting to the insects, because it's not a stress tree.
Right. So science hasn't made a Ips beetle resilient pinyon tree yet, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I would not hold my breath on that.
And maybe people should consider if they're replanting to plant a different species, like a juniper or something, right?
Yep. Diversity is really important on our landscapes, diversity of species and diversity of ages. So while you are planting potentially food for the Piñon Ips beetle in the future, you're improving the diversity of the stand age. And so then as the older trees die out for whatever reason, you're ensuring that the next generation will be there.
Here.
There are a few there, there's really not any other native trees to plant. So there's lots of other non-native trees you could plant. Well, maybe not lots, because we're in Western Colorado in the native areas, but like Austrian pine, Scotch pine, um, depending on where you are, Arizona cypress or some other kind of cypress. So there are some trees that we can recommend if you want something different. I would not plant Colorado blue spruce. They need way too
Yeah.
much water.
Yep, for sure.
All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to defensible space. So I'd like to just talk real quick about what makes a fire burn. And if you don't have the elements of the fire triangle, then you won't have a fire. If you don't have the fuel, if you don't have oxygen, if you don't have heat, if one of those sides of the triangle is missing, then then there's no fire. So obviously we can't control if there's oxygen, we can't control if there's heat, but we can control if there's fuel. And so that's what defensible space in wildfire mitigation is removing the fuel component of the fire triangle. What impacts fire behavior is the fuel, the weather, and the topography. Again, we can't impact the topography of the landscape. We can't change when a storm is coming in, but we can change the amount, the arrangement of the fuel. So that's just something to consider when you're thinking about mitigation on your property. So ways that a house can catch fire, some of this is kind of obvious, but I like these graphics. One is direct flame contact. The fire is moving through the landscape and it can move directly to your house because it's part of the fuel. There's no differentiation. The fire isn't differentiating between the trees and your house because it's all connected. So radiant heat, if you think about standing next to a campfire and the heat that's coming off of that, if it gets close enough, if there's something that's kind of flammable on the inside of the glass windows, the heat of that fire can radiate through the house and catch the inside of the house on fire. So radiant heat. Flying embers. This is something we've learned in the last 10 years, how extremely important embers are in moving a fire across the landscape and catching structures on fire. And I'll go into embers in more detail soon. So this is a fire that was in the Boulder area a few years ago. This house is standing, but you can see that it came right up to it. And why is it standing? Like, what's so interesting about this house that whatever the people did made sure that it didn't burn? I'm sorry, did that not? Oh, there you go. I have got to keep tapping. So there's the second photo where you can see that the house had a porch, and trees right below the house were burned. Well, this is why, and it's because they were currently in the process of replacing, well, one of the reasons the house survived is because they were currently replacing the wood decking with a composite decking. So it's not as flammable. So you can see that ash and embers were landing on the porch, but because of the material, it wasn't igniting the porch. And so that's part of, when we think about embers, it's not a ember. It's literally a firestorm of embers. And this is a simulation here, but this one isn't. This is a real situation. And the embers that a fire produces are significant. It's like a snowstorm of embers. And so we've learned that while doing tree reduction is important to protecting your home, it also is important that you have to harden your home and think about embers. So what is defensible space? It's the area around your structure where existing vegetation is modified to slow the rate and the intensity of a fire. So if you think about it, this freight train of fire is moving towards your property, and you want to have impacted the vegetation around your property in such a way that the wind moves the fire past your property without impacting your structure. And then you want to make sure that if an ember lands on the structure, that it can't, what I say, get into trouble. So a defensible space is not a guarantee. We've learned this, that the embers really do make a difference. So hardening your home is really a big thing that we're pushing, that it's not just removing trees. Like you can see this house didn't have any trees around it, but it didn't survive. But if you look underneath, they had a bunch of stuff stored underneath the structure. And so most likely embers were pushed underneath the porch and caught something under there on fire. And that's how the home was lost. So why is defensible space important? We cannot guarantee that a firefighter will be at your home, especially in the Glade Park area. Second, we cannot put firefighters' lives at risk. So we're not going to put a firefighter in a situation where the homeowner isn't even willing to make any changes to their space to make it safer. So why would we put a firefighter in that space? And if you had a structure fire, it reduces the likelihood of it spreading to the forest. So there's a lot of there, and this is just three. There's many more reasons of why defensible space is important, but these are three that I like to share. So how do you create a defensible space? Well, think of it as like a bullseye, the house being the center of the bullseye, and the most mitigation occurs closest to the bullseye. And then as you move out, it's a little bit less mitigation, as intense of mitigation. So there's three zones. Zone 1 is 0 to 5 feet. Zone 2 is 5 to 30 feet. And zone 3 is 30 to 100 feet, or as far as you want to go. I know some folks might be limited because of their situation with their neighborhood. They might not have the ability to mitigate 100 feet from their home, but that would be ideal, is a minimum of 100 feet of mitigation around your home. So I'm going to go into each of these zones. So zone 1 is 0 to 5 feet. You really want to minimize vegetation in this zone. I know we like to have our plants and our flowers and our pretty flowering bushes next to the house, but that's where embers can get trapped. That's where leaf litter can get trapped by and blown by the wind and trapped. And it's just a point where embers can collect, and depending on your siding, can potentially get into the house structure because of that ember and the heat and the flammable material right against the house siding. So ideally you have rock around the home. You don't want wood mulch because again that's flammable. So rock or dirt is ideal for that zone 1, 0 to 5 feet. So here's just some pictures. The one on the left is pretty ideal. Not a lot of material stacked underneath the porch, not a bunch of old scraps of wood. The one on the right, that's just an ember nightmare. I think you all can see that after what I've shared with you so far, that there's lots of places where embers can get stuck and make trouble. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. Here's the second photo. I gotta get used to double tapping. It shows up both on my screen. So sorry, here's the second photo where you can really see that there's lots of ember traps and places for embers to get blown into in that second photo. In this first photo, you can see that an ember in that space would have plenty of fuel. And one side is metal, the other side is some kind of composite or plywood, but you don't know what's on the other side of that metal. And metal obviously can transfer heat really easily. So if you have something flammable on the other side of that metal, it could be an issue. This is showing the crack in between the wood porch. So the siding is great, it's stucco, but an ember could easily get in this crack right here on this wood porch and get stuck, and then it has something to burn. So all you have to do here is put metal flashing to remove that space where embers could get in. Here, obviously, you need to just clean out all the leaf litter. You don't want this. This is kind of a blurry photo, but this juniper is one of the most flammable plants that people put next to their home, especially wood-sided homes. So we don't like common juniper next to the house, and we really don't like firewood stacked next to the house, even though this is a rock against the siding is rock. You don't know what the ceiling is. There's a window here. This is, an ember gets into this pile of firewood and it's got plenty of material to burn. I'm just going to keep moving to zone 2. So zone 1 again was 0 to 5 feet. Zone 2 is 5 to 30. Zone 1 being the area where you do the most mitigation, where you have nothing that's flammable, and 0 to 5. 5 to 30, you have trees, but they're spaced 15 to 20 feet apart. And we always talk about between crowns. So when we say 15 to 20 feet apart, we're talking about the crown spacing. We don't care so much what the spacing is on the trunks. This is what's flammable. The crown of the tree is what's flammable. And so when we want spacing between trees, it's the crowns, because if you imagine one tree on fire, you want the fire to really, the wind to really have to work hard to push those flames far enough to catch the next tree on fire. So maybe one tree burns, but it doesn't burn everything because there's so much space between the trees themselves. So ladder fuels are also part of zone 2, where we want ground fires. Ground fires are easy for crews to put out. Once they get into the crown of the fire, the wind can really push them and they're hard to slow down. And so we want to get rid of ladder fuel, stuff that can move from the grass into a shrub into the tree crown. So removing this ladder fuel can really make a difference. So in this example on the right, you can see that all that juniper is a ladder fuel. These trees are fine to leave. There's some aspen, there's some Austrian pine, but right now if a fire was in here, this would catch these trees on fire and there'd be no chance. If you remove this and a fire was in the grass, it would not easily move into the crowns of the trees. So this is what zone 2 can look like. We're not removing everything. We're just reducing. So if that freight train of fire comes towards your house, it hits zone 3, it slows down. It hits zone 2, it really slows down because it can't move from tree to tree because you've reduced. It hits zone 2, it can't even reach your house because you've removed all the material that could burn next to your house, and it just moves on. So here's just an example. This is aspen, but aspen can burn really nice if it's got this understory. So here's before and here's after. Now these homeowners can actually enjoy their property because it's not just a screen of trees. They can see into their landscape, and now if a fire came through, these aspen would be really protective for that home. So zone 3, so zone 1 is 0 to 5, zone 2 is 5 to 30, zone 3 is 30 to 100, or beyond, or not, or as far as you can. So this zone is the least amount of work, or you still want to work in zone 3, but it's the least amount of intrusive work, where you're reducing the amount of trees, you're removing the ladder fuel, but you can have a little more trees in here. It's not as extreme maybe as zone 2 can be. We talked about that a bit. So there are some trees, shrubs, and grasses that are considered firewise because they have a low resin or sap content. They grow without producing a lot of dead branches. They grow close to the ground. They're easily pruned, drought tolerant. So if you are thinking of planting, or if you're like, I really need some plants in my landscape because it makes me happy, just consider to some firewise plants. And the State Forest Service has some examples. If you just Google firewise plant material, you'll find plenty of options on the internet. The State Forest Service has produced the Home Ignition Zone Guide that has a lot of really great information. The website is on the screen. It's kind of long. So if you just Google Home Ignition Zone and CSFS for the Colorado State Forest Service, it'll pop right up into your Google search. Um, and that's the presentation. So let me stop sharing my screen somehow.
And I'll add the link to the home ignition zone guide on the YouTube recording for this. Kamie, if you could go, if you're able to find back in zone 1 some pictures of the leaves in the corner there.
Yes.
I think you mentioned it, but I wanted to mention it again, that leaves around your house can be a really good indicator of where embers are going to land because of the wind patterns around your house. So if you've got leaves and debris and pine needles that are kind of stacking up consistently in a place, that's probably also where embers from a fire are going to land. And it's important to, like you said, make sure you clean those spaces.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Ellis, is where where leaves accumulate is where the wind is going to blow and where embers can make trouble. So definitely something to pay attention of where your leaves gather. That's a great point. Thank you. Any other questions from folks online? I think,
No, you did a great job. Thank you so much. That was very
Thank you.
informational.
Yeah,
I
thank
think
you, Kamie.
the biggest thing is that if you know, hardening your home can certain things can be expensive, but some of it can be really straightforward and cheap, just like cleaning out where the leaves are accumulating, removing the stacks of firewood underneath your porch, paying attention to where leaves are gathering, and maybe you're getting a lot of leaves under your porch, so you put some fencing up that prevents leaf litter from gathering, cleaning out your gutters if you have trees that are putting material into your gutters, paying attention to vents that access the attic, sealing that off with some screening, some real fine screen. So there's some really easy steps that homeowners can take, and I know that Ellis has some of that information on the Two Rivers Wildfire Council website. So it doesn't have to be a big lift. If you have a wood roof, then that's something you want to be saving for and considering replacing, because that's your biggest surface area. If you have a wood decked porch, that's something that you might want to consider replacing with a composite. You don't have to necessarily worry about the upright porch, the posts, but it's the flat surface that the embers would land on that you want to replace with something that's not as flammable. So those are some of those long-term things that people can do to harden the home. And then just reducing the amount of trees around the home. If you have a tree right next to your home and you're like, that's the tree that I feed my birds out of, and there's no way I'm removing that tree next to my house. No problem. Just consider that tree part of your house and start your defensible space zones from the edge of that tree. And then you don't need to worry about removing that tree. It's part of your house.
Any other quick questions?
No question here. I just want to say thank you. That was great. A lot of good information there. Thank you both, Ellis and Kamie, for bringing that to us.
Thanks, David.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thanks for joining tonight.
Thank you so much, Kamie, and all of you have a good night. Take care. See you soon.
Yeah.
Bye.